"Don't get out of the car," my daughter's driver said to me that morning, his voice low and urgent. "Please, ma'am, stay down. You need to see this first." I didn't understand. I was 63 years old, dressed in my good blue dress, holding a small bouquet of white roses I'd cut from my own garden that morning, the same roses my daughter had always loved since she was a little girl. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My only daughter, my Caroline, was signing the papers today. Not a wedding, something better, I had thought. She was finally becoming a full partner in the firm her husband's family owned. 14 years of marriage. 14 years of watching her work twice as hard as anyone else in that building. Today was her day, and yet here I was, crouched in the back seat of a black car, being told by a man named Gerald, a driver who had worked for our family for 11 years, to stay hidden. "Gerald!" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "What on earth is going on?" He didn't answer right away. He just pulled the car slowly around the side of the building, past the main entrance, and stopped behind a row of hedges that lined the parking structure. He turned off the engine. Then he turned around and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Gerald was not a man who showed much. 11 years, and I had seen him smile maybe a dozen times. But what I saw in his eyes at that moment was something close to grief. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Elaine," he said. "I didn't know how to tell you on the phone. I needed you to see it yourself, because if I just told you, you might not believe me." My heart shifted. Not dropped, shifted. The way it does when something you have been quietly afraid of for a long time suddenly steps out of the shadows. "Tell me what, Gerald?" He looked out through the windshield. "Your son-in-law has been meeting someone here, in this building, before your daughter arrives, every Thursday for the past 4 months. He paused. Today is not Thursday. Today he came early. And he didn't come alone. I sat very still. My son-in-law's name was Richard Hale. He was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who always knew which fork to use at dinner and which jokes to laugh at. He had a firm handshake and a confident voice, and I had never fully trusted him. Not from the very first night Caroline brought him home. But I had kept that to myself. Because Caroline loved him, and because my husband, God rest him, had told me I was too suspicious of everyone. "Not every man is out to take something, Elaine," he used to say. My husband had been gone for 5 years now, and sometimes I thought he had been too generous with people. "How do you know this?" I asked Gerald. "Because I drive Mr. Hale sometimes," he said, "when his own driver is unavailable. He doesn't pay much attention to me. People like him rarely do." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a plain statement of fact. 4 months ago, he asked me to wait outside a coffee shop for 2 hours. I waited. He came out with a woman, young, maybe 30. He put her in a cab and told me to never mention it. Gerald's jaw tightened. "I have a daughter, Mrs. Elaine. She's 31, about the same age as your Caroline when she married him." I didn't say anything. I looked out the window at the side entrance of the building. "He's in there right now," Gerald said. "With her, in the conference room on the 2nd floor that his family reserves for private use." He reached into the glove compartment and placed a manila envelope on the seat beside me. I took photographs. I have the dates. I have records of where I drove him. I wasn't sure what to do with it, but when I found out Miss Caroline was signing those partnership papers today, the ones that would tie her finances completely to the firm, I knew I couldn't stay quiet. I looked at the envelope. I did not touch it yet. "Why today?" I asked. "The papers. Why does it matter that she signs them today?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Because I overheard a phone call 3 weeks ago." He didn't know I was listening. He told someone, I don't know who, that once Caroline's name was on those documents, all the firm's liabilities would be shared. The debts. There are debts, Mrs. Elaine. Serious ones. The kind that don't show up until someone goes looking. The roses in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. 14 years. I had watched my daughter build her life inside a house that was apparently sitting over a hole, and nobody had thought to tell her. I thought about all the Christmases at Richard's parents' estate, all the dinners where his father talked about legacy and loyalty and what it meant to be a Hale. I thought about the way Richard always redirected conversations when money came up, the way he smiled just a half second too late. I picked up the envelope. The photographs were clear. Gerald had taken them through the glass partition on the second floor. Richard with a woman, sitting close, paper spread between them on the table. Not romantic photographs. Something almost worse. They looked like partners. They looked like two people making a plan. And then I turned to the third photograph and I stopped breathing for a moment. The woman in the picture was not a stranger. I had met her twice. Once at a firm dinner 3 years ago, introduced as a junior associate from another office. Once at a charity event last spring, where she and Richard had greeted each other with a handshake so practiced it had almost looked rehearsed. Her name was Danae, and in this photograph she was holding a document that I recognized because I had seen the template on Caroline's kitchen table just 2 weeks ago. A partnership agreement. Except this one had a different name on the signature line. Dana's name. I sat in that car for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 4 minutes. Then I put the photographs back in the envelope and I said very calmly, "Gerald, I need you to do 2 things for me." He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Yes, ma'am. I need you to call my daughter and tell her you've been asked to pick her up early. Don't tell her why. Just get her here before she goes inside." I smoothed my dress. "And I need you to find out which room her attorney is in. Her personal attorney, not the firm's attorney. His name is Mr. Calloway. He was supposed to be here today as a courtesy review." Gerald nodded slowly. "And the second thing? That was 2 things." "Yes, ma'am." Something crossed his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. "What do you need me to do right now?" "Right now," I said. "I need you to drive me to the front entrance. I'm going upstairs." He turned around to look at me fully. "Mrs. Elaine, I'm 63 years old, Gerald. I have buried a husband, raised a daughter, alone for the last 5 years, and I once told a man at a school board meeting exactly what I thought of him for 45 minutes without raising my voice." I tucked the envelope under my arm. "I think I can manage a conversation." He drove me to the front. The lobby of the building was cool and marble floored, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. I had always thought that was intentional. I took the elevator to the second floor. The hallway was empty, except for a young receptionist at a glass desk who looked up when I approached. "I'm here to see Richard Hale," I said. "Tell him his mother-in-law is here. Tell him it's about the signing." She hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one." I said it pleasantly. I have found in 63 years that pleasantness delivered with absolute certainty is more effective than any raised voice. "Please let him know I'm here." She made a call. I stood and looked at the framed portraits on the wall, 3 generations of Hales, all broad-shouldered, all with that same half-second smile. Richard came out of the conference room 2 minutes later. He was alone. He had clearly composed himself because by the time he reached me, his expression was the one I knew best. Warm, slightly amused, just patronizing enough to be deniable. "Elaine," he said, "what a surprise. Caroline didn't mention you'd be joining us. She doesn't know I'm here yet. I kept my voice even. Is there somewhere we can speak privately? Just for a moment, before the signing." He studied me. People like Richard are always calculating, always deciding how much you know versus how much you think you know. He must have decided I was a worried mother acting on instinct because he relaxed slightly and gestured toward a small sitting room off the hallway. We sat down. I placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. He looked at it. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. "I know about the debts," I said. "I know about the debts. I know about Dana. I know about the amended partnership document with her name on it." I folded my hands in my lap. "And I know that once Caroline signs this morning, she becomes legally responsible for financial obligations she has never been told about." The room was very quiet. "Elaine." His voice was careful now. The warmth was gone. "Whatever you think you've seen, I have photographs," I said. "I have dates and records. And I have a call into Mr. Calloway, who I believe is already in this building." Something shifted in his face then. Not guilt. Richard was not the kind of man who did guilt. It was more like recalculation. A door closing, another one opening. "You don't understand the full picture," he said. "Then explain it to me." He didn't. People who tell you that you don't understand the full picture almost never explain the full picture. They just repeat it until you go away. I had learned that a long time ago. "Here is what's going to happen," I said. "Caroline is on her way here right now. She is going to sit down with Mr. Calloway and go through those partnership documents line by line before she signs anything. If everything is exactly as she was told, then you have nothing to worry about." I looked at him. "And if it isn't, well, then this conversation will have been very useful for everyone." He stood up. "You are making a very serious mistake." "I've made mistakes before," I said. "This isn't one of them." He left the room. I sat and waited. Caroline arrived 18 minutes later. I heard her voice in the hallway before I saw her, that particular tone she gets when she's confused but trying not to show it, the same tone she had at 7 years old when she knew something was wrong but wasn't sure what to ask. I stepped out and she saw me, and her face went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds: surprise, relief, and then the beginning of understanding. "Mom." She looked at the envelope in my hand. "What is this?" "Come sit with me," I said. "I'll tell you everything. And then we're going to wait for Mr. Calloway together." We sat in that small room for a long time. I told her carefully, in the order it mattered, starting with Gerald's phone call that morning and ending with the photographs. I watched her face as she looked at each one. I did not tell her what to feel. I did not tell her what to do. That was not my place. She was my daughter, not my child. There is a difference, and it took me too many years to learn it. When she got to the photograph of the partnership document with Dana's name, she set it down and looked at the wall for a while. "How long?" she asked. Not about the affair. She would ask that later, in private, in her own time. She meant something specific. "How long have the debts been there?" "Gerald heard a conversation 3 weeks ago," I said. "But from what I understand, it may be longer." She nodded slowly. Then she picked up the photographs again and looked at them with the careful attention she has always given to things that hurt her. "My daughter has never looked away from hard things. She gets that from her father." Mr. Calloway arrived within the hour. He was a quiet man in his 60s with reading glasses and a habit of underlining things twice, and he went through those documents with a thoroughness that made me deeply grateful Caroline had kept him on retainer all these years despite Richard's suggestions that it was an unnecessary expense. He found the provisions Caroline had not been shown, liability clauses buried in the addenda, a restructuring agreement that predated this signing by 8 months. He set his pen down and looked at Caroline over his glasses and said very simply, "You cannot sign this." Caroline said, "I know." Richard did not take it quietly. There was a conversation that I was not present for. Caroline asked me to wait in the hallway, and I did, because that was the right thing. I stood by the window and looked out at the parking lot and thought about my husband, the way I still do when things are very hard. I thought about what he would have said. He would have said something steady and a little bit funny, the way he always did. And then he would have squeezed my hand. I squeezed my own hand and waited. When Caroline came out, her eyes were red, but her chin was level. She stood next to me and looked out the window for a moment without speaking. "He said I was always suspicious," she said finally. "He said I let you put ideas in my head." I didn't say anything. "He said that's what controlling mothers do." "What do you think?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I think Gerald has worked for our family for 11 years, she said, "and he drove 40 minutes out of his way this morning because he thought someone should know." I thought about Gerald sitting in the parking lot right now, waiting, the way he always waited. "He has a daughter," I said, "about your age." Caroline nodded. She understood. The formal proceedings took several more weeks. Attorneys and accountants and the particular kind of paperwork that accumulates when a financial deception unravels. The debts were real. The restructuring was real. Dana was, in fact, already operating as a silent partner in an amended version of the firm that had been registered quietly in another state. Mr. Calloway told us, with his characteristic understatement, that the timing of Caroline's signing had been quite deliberate. Richard moved out. The divorce was not easy. 14 years rarely ends easily. But Caroline had the documentation. She had Mr. Calloway, and she had the particular clarity that comes when a lie you have been living inside finally has walls you can see and measure. She called me one evening, about 2 months after everything had come apart. It was a Tuesday, ordinary, the kind of evening where nothing is supposed to happen. She called and she said, "Mom, I want to ask you something." "Anything?" I said. "That morning, when Gerald called you." She paused. "Were you scared?" I thought about sitting in the back of that car, the roses on my lap, the envelope on the seat beside me, the way my heart had shifted rather than dropped, because some part of me had been quietly afraid for longer than I had admitted. "Yes," I said honestly. "I was scared. I just decided it didn't matter as much as you did." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to send Gerald something," she said. "A real thank you. I've been thinking about what to do, and I think it should be something real, not just a card." "He would appreciate that," I said, "though he'd tell you it wasn't necessary." "I know," she said. "I'll send it anyway." I went to my kitchen after we hung up and stood at the window looking at the rose bushes in the yard. They were coming up again, the white ones. They always do. Every spring, reliable as anything I have ever known. I thought about what it means to see something coming that no one else wants to look at. I thought about the years I had spent trusting other people's reassurances over my own instincts, telling myself I was too suspicious, too protective, too much. My husband had meant it kindly. He was a kind man. But there is a difference between being suspicious of everyone and knowing your own daughter's life the way you know your own hands. I had known something was wrong. I had known it in the particular way you know things that have no proof yet, a feeling that sits behind your sternum and doesn't move no matter how many times you talk yourself out of it. I was glad I had finally stopped talking myself out of it. Gerald still drives for us sometimes. He doesn't mention that morning. He's not the kind of man who brings up things he's done for people. He's the kind of man who just keeps showing up. But last spring, when Caroline sent him what she sent him, he called me to say thank you. And at the end of the call, he said very quietly, "Your daughter is going to be all right, Mrs. Elaine." I already knew that, but it was good to hear. If you are listening to this story and you have a feeling, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that just sits there and waits, please do not keep talking yourself out of it. The people who love us are not always protected by our silence. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk through a door that frightens you, with an envelope under your arm and roses in your hand, and simply refuse to look away. That's all I did that morning. I refused to look away. And it turned out that was exactly enough.